most developed countries, the service sector makes a majority of the GDP, usually around two-thirds of it. In the US, the service sector is worth about 77% of the GDP. The service sector is made up of three categories of services. The first category is consumer services. Consumer services are exactly what they sound like, providing services to consumers who can pay for them. Consumer services are split again into four categories, and they are wholesale and retail, which are things like grocery and department stores, education, health and social, and leisure and hospitality. Apart from consumer, there's also business services. Business services are meant to provide services to other business. Business services are also split into three categories, which are professional services such as design, architecture, and custodial, financial services such as real estate and insurance. There's also transportation and information services such as trucking and warehousing. Finally, the third primary kind of service is public service, which are things like the fire and police departments. The service sector has made up the majority of growth in employment worldwide in recent times. In the US, the primary and secondary sectors have nothing but declined, while the service sector has seen all of the growth in employment. The service sector was also the most impacted by the recession of 2008, however. For example, in California, the amount of houses in foreclosure rose to 1,103,537, which is a 377% increase from 2006, just 2 years prior. The rapid increase in housing prices meant the business sector was severely damaged because no one was buying houses. There's also a slump in consumer spending, damaging consumer services as well. Leisure and hospitality are also impacted as people are less likely to eat at restaurants and go on vacations and such during a recession. The recession was ultimately caused by the business sector's subprime mortgage crisis, however, which shows the sheer size of the service sector. Consumer services tend to follow a pattern. Generally, the bigger a settlement is, the more consumer services it can provide. The most profitable location for consumer services can be identified by the central place theory. A central place is a market center for people attracted to goods and services nearby. Central places are generally placed to increase accessibility to everyone. Central place theory states that stores and services compete to be the market for their market area, which is what causes the patterns it describes. A market area, or hinterland, is an area which a service attempts to serve. For example, if a Walmart and a Target are both trying to get customers from the same area, but the Target is farther away from everyone, the Walmart is more likely to be successful. However, if someone is closer to the periphery of a market area, and there is an even closer service nearby, they will go to that instead. For example, even if the Walmart is closer to the majority of people, if there is someone who lives only a couple blocks down from the Target, they'll still go there instead of the Walmart. In central place theory, to represent market areas, hexagons are used. Different market areas have different ranges and thresholds. Range is how far consumers are willing to travel to get certain services. Most consumers are not willing to travel 2 cities over to get a McDonald's breakfast sandwich, but they might be willing to do so to watch the Super Bowl. Fast food restaurants usually have a 3-mile range, while better restaurants might have a 5-mile range. Stadium and concert or convention venues might have 6 miles of range instead. Range can also change due to the fact that most people don't think of the distance they're driving but how long it'll take. If someone says they're willing to drive 12 minutes for a 99-cent store, this could mean 10 miles on the freeway, but only 4 on a street with heavy traffic. Services also have thresholds, which are the minimum amount of consumers needed to make a profit. A consumer service will want to locate themselves where there are enough potential customers to meet the threshold. So by taking range and threshold into account, someone looking to open a store or other consumer service can determine where they should do so. There is a sort of hierarchy to where services are, too. In general, a smaller city or town will have less services and they'll have less threshold, range, and general market area. For example, a family-owned bookstore in a small 1,000-person town in Iowa is going to have a much smaller market area than a major department store in LA. But it isn't just market area. There are less and different services in smaller places. The major department store in LA couldn't exist in the 1,000-person town because it just doesn't meet the threshold. A family-owned bookstore couldn't exist in LA because everyone would go to major bookstores instead, like a Barnes & Noble. Settlements of different sizes are distributed in a regular pattern in developed countries, usually following one of two rules. One is the rank size rule, which states that the second largest city in a country is half the size of the largest, and the third largest city in a country is a third of the size, so on and so forth. When a logarithmic graph is made with a country that follows the rank size rule, it produces a fairly straight line. For example, the United States closely follows the rank size rule. New York City has about 8 million people, and LA has about 4 million. Chicago has about 2 million, etc., etc. If a country does not produce a straight line, it most likely follows the primate rule, which is that the largest city in a country has to have over twice the population as the second largest city. For example, England follows the primate city rule. Its largest city, London, has 7 million people, making it a primate city, while its second largest city, Birmingham, has a mere 1 million. Central place theory is overall very helpful studying market areas and knowing where to locate a service and maximum profitability.
In the recent decades, the world is beginning to globalize, and this is affecting the way cities are structured. This is shown by the recent trend towards massive international cities called global cities. Global cities are massive cities that are typically characterized by things such as massive stock exchanges, influential political relevance, massive transit networks, and sizable international airports. International cities grow because cities like Hong Kong, Dubai, and New York have corporations that require services such as insurance, lawyers, accountants, and contract work. This growth in turn attracts more corporations who seek out the infrastructure already laid out, and stockbrokers who require these corporations to function. This results in a large amount of international trade. However, cities grow at different rates. This results in tiers of cities. Global cities are rated on tiers, which show how influential a city is. To determine the tier of a city, they are weighed on 4 separate factors. Economic factors, which describe the amount of headquarters within a city. Political factors, which describes the amount of highly influential organizations within a city. Cultural factors, like media, sports, and education. And lastly, infrastructural factors, which are major airports, advanced communication, and healthcare. Due to their immense size, alpha cities such as London and New York have extensive consumer sectors, which are larger than their population would predict. Some of these luxury goods and events such as sporting events, clubs, high-end clothing, and museums are all common in global cities due to the large cultural impact and wealth in major global cities. Although a majority of headquarters for corporations are located within major global cities, many services typical of larger corporations are done offshore. The offices that handle these services are called the business process outsourcing. The purpose of BPOs is to cut costs on lower skilled jobs like customer service by utilizing LDRs to pay less wages and require workers to work longer hours. Due to their previous history with the West, countries such as India and Malaysia are prime targets for BPOs due to their population being mostly fluent in English and their lower cost of living. Corporations may also choose to use BPOs due to the lower taxes in the area, which further cut costs. Another perceived benefit for the corporations are the overseas assets, which are not under jurisdiction of the country they are located in. This gives them a way to protect their assets in case of a legal battle, such as a lawsuit. Specialization is how societies first began to grow, and this has carried over into the modern era, which has permeated itself through the state level. Each state's specialization is called its basic industry. These are goods or services which the state or country exports, while non-basic industries are imported goods or services. A state's basic industry is affected by things like the geography, climate, and the resources in a given area. The basic and non-basic industries of a given area may change over time due to things like lack of resources or innovation. For example, California mainly used to export gold, however now it's a leading tech giant. Another factor in the basic industries in an area is the distribution of talent. The distribution of talent in a given area is the amount of professionals, scientists, and other highly educated people per capita. However, the distribution of talent within an area can be influenced by things like cultural diversity and education. Rural settlements are agricultural communities that come in 2 varieties: dispersed rural settlements and clustered rural settlements. Dispersed rural settlements are self-sufficient farms that are isolated from other farms, while clustered rural settlements are living alongside other farmers. This does not necessarily mean the farms are working together. Clustered rural settlements come in different shapes and models. For example, the circular rural settlement are a type of rural settlement that is common in the most isolated parts of Africa. They are common because the circular shape gives them protection and space in the middle for livestock. Linear rural settlements are a type of settlement that clusters farmers in a line. This type of settlement is typically close to a river. Linear rural settlements tend to be more rare due to the fact that the United Kingdoms in the 1750s enforced a policy called the Enclosure Movement that required clustered farms to relocate to become isolated farms. The early nomadic people didn't practice specialization or agriculture, meaning they were all hunter-gatherers. However, eventually, services were born. The first consumer service was burying the dead. While the first nomadic peoples never settled down, they did have designated spots to bury the dead. This resulted in priests who would get paid to do ceremonies and pray for the dead. With the first permanent structures and locations realized, the early nomadic people were encouraged to make permanent housing. Settling down meant women would take more responsibilities beyond childcare. The first public services were that of a soldier. The soldier would protect the settlements and its food sources. With more safety came the first business services. This came in the form of transportation services, who were merchants who would sell extra food or resources. This allowed settlements to have stockpiles of food in case of emergency, and allowed settlements to get access to resources they wouldn't normally have. The Fertile Crescent is where these first societies formed. This later diffused throughout the rest of Europe. Urbanization is a concept that more people are going into urban settlements. Urbanization is broken down to three parts. First is the number of people living within urban settlements, and the second is the percentage of people living in global cities. In the recent times, urbanization is becoming a more common phenomenon. For example, in 2008, the number of people within urban settlements has exceeded the amount of people within rural settlements across the globe. And this is due to the fact that lesser developed countries dominate the largest urban settlement list. This naturally forces more people into urban settlements. Another factor helping the trend towards globalization is the number of urban settlements. The number of urban settlements across the globe continues to grow, further increasing the amount of people within urban settlements. The difference between urban cities compared to rural settlements is important because they are fundamentally different. These differences can be split into three different categories: size, density, and social heterogeneity. In urban settlements, you are likely to know a small percentage of people within your community, while in rural settlements, you are likely to know many, if not all, people living around you. This is a consequence of the smaller population of rural settlements. In urban settlements, it is common for people to have specialized jobs, however, it is uncommon for people to own land. However, in rural settlements, almost all the populace own their own land and have a non-restricted job. In urban settlements, there are more opportunities for unusual jobs, different ideologies, and philosophies, due to the more diverse array of people within urban settlements. However, in rural settlements, there is typically racial homogeneity and a very unmoving set of beliefs among its population.